good afternoon. On March 26, I ordered the temporary suspension of Transit Windsor service to help flatten the curve in our community and to help save lives in the City of Windsor. I recognize that this was a decision that caused some anxiety and concern for some in our community. Some individuals are opposed to this measure. Since that time, I have done my best to explain this decision through media interviews and through individual phone calls and emails which have come to my office. Now let me be clear. I ordered the suspension of transit service to help protect the health and well-being of transit riders and drivers alike. Given that my original order was set to expire this weekend, it was prudent to review the situation and determine the best course of action for the weeks ahead. When I first ordered the suspension of Transit Windsor service, we had 5 cases of COVID-19 confirmed in Windsor, Essex. Today, we have over 260. 2 weeks ago, Italy and Spain were considered the hot spots around the world. Today, we are monitoring the situation in Detroit with growing concern. The province of Ontario has also issued some significant and dramatic measures, including the closure of all non-essential workplaces effective March 24th, limitation on non-essential gatherings to no more than 5 persons effective March 28th, extending the provincial declaration of emergency at least until April 13th, and closing all public schools at least until May the 4th. As I was preparing to revisit the transit suspension, I asked our administration and our Transit Windsor leadership to review the situation locally, to consider what they're hearing from other transit operators across the province and the country, and to provide me with their best advice. That report that I received this morning recommends a continued suspension of transit service. But ultimately, this is my call. It's not something that I expected to do when I first ran to be mayor of our great city. We get into public life to build our community up, not to shut it down. But when I think about the impact this virus is having on our community and our country, and frankly, the impact that this virus is having on all of our lives, I simply cannot in good conscience allow transit services to resume until the worst of this pandemic has passed. So today I have extended the suspension of Transit Windsor until the end of the month, April the 30th. I know that this decision is going to continue to concern some in our community. That's why the city has already come to the table with a transit rebate that was announced and approved by City Council last week. And I know that many services are being initiated by the voluntary sector to support the most vulnerable in our society. I'm certainly impressed and inspired by those in our city who are stepping up to help deliver food, to offer rides, and ensure that essential transportation needs are met. The City of Windsor is going to continue to work with these non-government and charitable sector partners to help make sure that nobody is left behind at this critical time. But this is an evolving situation. Staff are stretched to the limit, and they're doing their best to respond as quickly and responsibly as possible. Our collective response to this global pandemic is certainly going to be deemed imperfect. But when we look back on our actions taken, I don't want us to take any unnecessary risks. I don't want to look back and think we could have done something more. And therefore, the continued suspension of public transit service is quite simply in the public health interest at this time. I know acutely that I will be judged for this decision, and I am 100% content with that, because every action that we are taking at the City of Windsor and every decision that I am making as mayor is being undertaken to help us flatten the curve, and it's being undertaken to help save lives. Thank you for the opportunity to make these opening remarks, and before we take your questions, I'm going to ask Pat Delmore, Executive Director of Transit Windsor, to bring forward his perspective. But before I turn the microphone over to Pat, let me also close by acknowledging that this is a long weekend coming up. Passover and Easter celebrations are going to look very different for many of us this year. And regardless of your faith, I want to take a moment to wish everyone a safe and healthy long weekend and stress the critical importance of staying home to stay safe. Pat, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Earlier this week, when we were asked to look at the impact of having no transit service and where we should be going from here, Transit Windsor administration have been working very closely, looking at what is happening in the transit industry right across the country and the impact that it's having on municipalities. It is a very difficult decision for administration to say that we recommend the continued suspension of transit service. However, we as well feel that it is best at this time based on what is happening right across our country. I'm seeing my colleagues in the transit industry struggle with providing enough buses on the street, providing the appropriate PPE for their employees, be it sanitizer, wipes, gloves, and now masks. The challenges that they're having with keeping social distancing on buses and trying to keep those buses clean and sanitized as they travel around their communities. With social distancing, many municipalities have moved to allow only 10 or even 15 passengers on board a bus at any given time. That's posed many problems for drivers who are being put in the position to enforce that, and in many times it's not. So the social distancing aspect is becoming a big concern. And when our administration looked at the potential of who is desperately in need of rides in our community, we were concerned about the social distancing aspect and being able to provide that level of certainty that people can get on our buses and be assured that they're riding around safely. So it was a difficult decision. We know that there are people in our community that are being impacted by this, and we also at this time, ask the community, this is the time to come together. I've heard many examples of businesses, of groups that are helping each other out to support those that need transit, that need a ride to work, that need a ride to where they need to go. And I think this is the time that as a community we show our strength in what we are and know that transit will be back here. And when we are, we'll be back in full force providing the service to our community.
Thank you.
Mayor, what does this mean for transit staff members?
I'll let Pat talk about the actions we've taken.
Transit Windsor has provided layoff notices to a number of employees. We have wording within our collective agreement, and that wording has been followed. Layoff notices are effective next week, so we do have a number of employees that will be laid off.
How many employees?
About 130.
CTV for 2?
Questions from CTV?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just following along on the Facebook stream, and it's a little bit behind. Just in terms of the recommendation, Mayor, you had mentioned that this was, in the public health interest. The health unit, Wajid Ahmed, has still failed to call for transit to be canceled, still saying that public transit can be maintained with certain measures. I guess why do you still feel that despite that lack of recommendation from the health unit that this is the way forward?
Well, I think I think in response to that question, let me say that I have spoken again with Dr. Ahmed last Friday about this decision and the transit issue in general. He reiterates the importance of the social equity piece. But on the public health piece, our medical officer of health also acknowledges that seniors 65 and over, those who are vulnerable or medically compromised, should not be taking transit at this particular time. And so Dr. Ahmed acknowledges fully that there is a group and a subset of the population that should not be riding transit at this time. And so I appreciate his advice. From the very start of the first decision that I made, I told Dr. Ahmed that I wasn't asking for his permission or his approval or disapproval, but I wanted his feedback and his opinion. I sought that. I absolutely considered Dr. Ahmed's opinion. I appreciate the conversations and understanding his perspective, but ultimately the call is mine. And it's hard for me to ignore what I see happening across Canada with other transit systems, what I see happening across our province of Ontario, what's happened in the city of Detroit, what's happening in New York and other areas. And at the end of the day, my responsibility is to the people in the city of Windsor. And this decision is not made lightly. The extension of the order is not made lightly. And I really feel my responsibility is to help save lives. And I feel that's what we're doing here with this decision.
Follow-up from CTV?
That's what I wanted to ask. I'll leave it to other reporters to ask any other questions they have.
Blackburn for 2?
Yeah, Joe, I know you just kind of mentioned that, you know, your responsibility to the City of Windsor and not to any other jurisdiction anywhere else, but no other transit company that I know of has made a similar decision. Why, is there nothing that you think that could be done to help protect the drivers, like other jurisdictions are doing?
Yeah, so again, every transit system will be different. The mechanics of the system will be different. The populations they serve will be different. And so, you know, I think if you simply go to Google and you search transit systems or transit and COVID-19, and you look at the systems, whether it's Calgary, Vancouver, the TTC in Toronto, Go Transit, Brampton, London, OC Transpo, Detroit, New York, if you start looking at the number of cases where operators are being significantly impacted by COVID-19, I think you'll be very, you'll be hopefully as concerned as I am with respect to that type of thing happening here. And if you put yourself in my shoes, you may actually say, hey, this isn't a bad move to try and protect both the drivers and the public. And so that's what this is all about. And notwithstanding, you know, certain comments that have been said over the last week, let's reflect on the fact that we have employees that have to operate these buses, and I'm equally concerned for their health and well-being as I am for the general population who would be using Transit Windsor at this time. And when I think of, you know, long-term care homes, and we've seen more reports in the last week with workers at long-term care homes being infected with the virus and starting to spread the virus in certain long-term care homes, I am certainly very concerned with the prospect of operating a transit system where I may be taking the workers in these long-term care homes to work for them to go in and deal with seniors that are isolated. And I certainly, you know, I don't make the decision lightly, and I get it is not popular for everyone, but at the end of the day, this is about trying to reduce the community transmission of a very deadly virus and trying to save lives.
Anything further from Blackburn?
It's not a follow-up, it's a different question, if that's okay. You said 130 layoffs. Is that the whole staff, or is the entire staff been redeployed in other cities?
That is, they're predominantly operators, and no other employees are being redeployed at this time.
CBC for 2?
Is this me?
CBC?
Okay, perfect. A handful of councillors opposed the transit shutdown. Were they involved in today's decision? If not, why not?
Yeah, so my decision is and the continuation of the order is made under the Emergency Act. And so it's a decision that I have to make. It's not a decision for City Council. It's not one that I make lightly. And at the end of the day, this is about trying to save lives in our community.
Okay, can I ask another, please?
Sure.
This is unrelated to transit, but how concerned are you about a firefighter who showed up to work after being tested for COVID and then later being tested positive for COVID?
So we deal with these issues very seriously. There are protocols in place. The Chief of Fire, Steve Laforette, has spoken with the health unit, and we're following all protocols that have been put in place. And with respect to, and I'm not sure what incident you're talking about, but yesterday I know the chief did close station number 5 for a period of time, brought in a cleaning crew who did a very fulsome cleaning of that facility so that it could reopen within a 24-hour period.
But are you concerned at all that there was a third firefighter who has been tested, who showed up to work, later being tested positive? And how did this happen?
Listen, I'm concerned about every single person who gets tested positive in this particular case. And from a workplace perspective, we are putting a lot of protocols in place, have a lot of protocols in place to make sure that our staff are safe, and that when we do find out about a positive case, that we take appropriate action to clean facilities, to inform other staff in terms of contact tracing, and make sure that we are doing everything we can to protect our employees and, of course, the folks that they may interact with in the public as well.
Windsor
Okay, and
Star?
this in relation to Transit Windsor, Reno Borderland tweeted suggesting Riverside open up to pedestrians, especially given, the shutdown. Should part of Riverside Drive be designated to pedestrians only?
I think there are a lot of issues going on in the community, and our ability to resource something like that and manage the different risks that are associated, i.e. Closures of road, managing flows of ambulance, proper fire response, and getting the volunteers that would be required in order to do that, I think would be a challenge at this particular time. It's worth noting that our park system is open. We have 135 kilometers of trails throughout the City of Windsor in our park system, and the public is more than encouraged to use those public spaces at any time.
Windsor
Okay,
Star,
and this last
please.
question, Dr. Tony Hammer of the Erie Street St. Clair Addiction Center has said that due to the suspension of Transit Windsor, people are having troubles accessing treatment for addiction. What do you say to that?
Listen, I know the decision has inconvenienced some people, there is no doubt. And there are different segments of the population who are inconvenienced by this decision. And I did not make, and I don't take this decision lightly. I get it. And so at the end of the day, this is about trying to stop and reduce the spread of COVID-19, the community transmission of COVID-19. And so I'm delighted that we're not seeing the exponential growth that some other communities are seeing with the community transmission of this virus. But at the end of the day, I think of where we started a little over a week ago, where we had 5 confirmed cases, and now we're at 260. And in my mind, that certainly underscores the importance of wanting to make sure that we're not inviting people into a service where that community transmission can happen.
Windsor
Will
Star,
the shutdown
please.
be extended further past April 30th, possibly?
Next question is to the Windsor Star, please.
Yeah, I just want to, is that true that this is the only transit service in Ontario or in Canada that has been shut down?
I can't speak to all of them. Pat, you're more familiar with CUDA and what other transit systems are doing. I can share with you that I was contacted this week by 2 other transit services in Ontario who are very interested in the actions that we took and called to have a meeting to discuss how we did it and all of the issues associated with it. And we had fulsome discussions with those 2 providers, but Pat can talk to CUDA and what's happening across Canada.
Yeah. There are a number of municipalities that are considering looking at their transit service and the levels that they're providing and scaling back. A number have canceled services in many areas of their cities, but there aren't really any that have done a full closure. I have just been made aware of the City of Lethbridge that is doing something differently, where they have suspended their transit service, but they're doing a little bit of a different model in how they can get some people around. This is part of the work that we as an administration have been doing in trying to understand what's happening right across the country and how we could possibly implement something in our community as we look at what level we can have today, or maybe it's in the near future as well.
Okay, and my other question is, why not consult council about an issue like this?
Issues like this, Brian, have the potential to become highly political. And I think there's a reason that the province has the Emergency Act that allows the head of council to make decisions that can help remove the politics in an otherwise very difficult situation. And so I've seen in the last week some of that politicization happen. And certainly, I've got big shoulders. I can handle a whole lot, and it's easier for me to put my head on the pillow at night when I know I've made decisions with the right information and for the right reasons, and that's really to protect the residents in the community. And so I am more than happy to wear this decision. I'm comfortable with that. I think it's the right decision for the community, and I acknowledge that this is not perfect. This is a decision that will continue to impact certain people in the community. And when we made the first decision, we were aware that transit service had dropped, ridership had dropped by 77% in the month of March, and so we were seeing a dramatic decrease. And with Dr. Ahmed's order that seniors 65 and over, those who are vulnerable, those who are medically compromised, that they shouldn't be riding the system. Internally, it's the administrative opinion that your ridership would probably be down around 90%. And so I get that there is probably 10% of transit riders that will be impacted. And it's my hope and expectation, really, from what I've seen in the community, and I know this is happening, that community groups have stepped up, that neighbors, friends, and family have stepped up, that employers who employ essential workers have also stepped up to provide rides and work out ride sharing arrangements so that they can help get their employees to work, so that the grocery stores can remain open, that Lowe's and Home Depot and these types of stores can remain open, and that staff can get there. And it's been very comforting to me, the calls that I've received over the last week with employees and managers of some of these businesses talking to me about the issue, thanking me for making the decision, and telling me how they've adjusted to be able to last in the short term as we all deal with this very important community issue together.
Okay.
We'll just cycle through once more. Rob? CTV, anything further? Blackburn?
No, I'm good.
CBC?
Will this be extended past April 30th possibly?
The order expires at the end of the day on April the 30th. That's the expectation today.
Just some clarity on the timeline. I think this April 30th number has been bandied about, but in the release it talks about this suspension is carrying on until further notice. Is there any clarity on this?
And so the order that I signed calls for the suspension of the service until April the 30th, or through the end of business day on April the 30th. The memo from administration certainly indicates that it should be suspended until further notice. And so I've considered that, but in order to give the public a natural time for check-in on the issue, we wanted to put April 30th there. So to answer the question directly, this issue continues to evolve on a day-by-day basis, frankly, on an hour-by-hour basis. And so we will continue to monitor, and if there is an opportunity to open early, I think we would consider that if it makes sense. And if the situation grows even more difficult, then we would look at further suspension. But right now, the check-in date will be April the 30th, and the public should know that we're watching this on a day-by-day basis.
Windsor Star?
No, I'm good.
Anybody else? Last questions. Great. Thank you for participating. Have a good long weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.